We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Brigid Jaipaul-Valenza.
I'm Dave Debo.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops market.
The suburban area, everywhere. We must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
And good morning. This is Dave Debo on the program today. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things. Stay with us. Many things to come. Among them, this weekend's Re Awaken America tour. We're going to look at the observations yesterday on the third month since the shootings. Jay Moran will be by talking about food, apartheid, disparities, and this weekend's Igniting Hope Conference. And we wrap up the program today with Brigid Jaipaul-Valenza and Ekuaa Mends-Aidoo. She is the Chief People and Diversity Officer at Evergreen Health. A lot of things to get to. Let's jump right into it. And I'd like to do that with WBFO reporter Tom Dinki. He was this past weekend spending much of the weekend, Friday specifically, at the Re Awaken America tour. And in light of some of the things that Tom has reported on about extremism in the past, we thought this would be the perfect opportunity to sort of do a recap of that and a look at this particular conference. Some people have called it, I guess, a far-right road show. Various groups pulling together in Batavia and talking about issues facing the country. And a lot of times, Tom, these groups, thanks for being here, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A lot of times these groups overlap, is that fair to say, with some of the, do I call them racist, groups that are out there?
I suppose you could use the term white supremacist, white nationalist, extremist. Yeah, for sure. A lot of the ideas at the Re Awaken America tour, whether it be COVID-19, vaccines, the 2020 election, I think it's fair to say white nationalists share a lot of those same beliefs.
And they did, at the beginning of the program, start to talk a little bit about race issues. I noticed in the very opening of the program, they had shots of Dr. Martin Luther King. They went out of their way to say things like, we are not necessarily white supremacists. We are not necessarily racists. But in one of the early sections, they actually talked a little bit about State Attorney General Letitia James, and she had voiced a lot of concern that an event like this could, in fact, spur racially motivated violence.
Yeah, like you said, Attorney General Letitia James voiced concern the event could spur that violence. She specifically connected it back to the Buffalo Tops shooting in terms of the ideals of the alleged shooter in the Tops incident. I would say Mark Burns, who was the pro-Trump pastor, he actually led a prayer for Letitia James that was quite kind of controversial and some would maybe argue had a vaguely threatening tone.
All right, let's hear that.
Are you mean to tell me, New York, that you don't believe Joe Biden is the president of the United States of America? You mean to tell me that you don't want Donald J. Trump to come back later? You want him to come back right now?
And that was an example of Burns talking about Trump. Let's listen to the next little excerpt you have.
Yeah.
And in this one, he specifically talks a little bit about James and race.
That, Father, if she does not repent and turn back to you, show the world what happens to those that comes against your servants. For the Bible declares that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. The battle is not ours, but it's his. So we love you, Letitia James.
Yeah, and that was Burns basically calling on James to repent, and I suppose there's no other way to say it. I guess he's calling on her to repent for voicing concern that Re Awaken America could spur racially motivated violence.
Was it threatening to her, do you think?
I think it could be. I actually spoke with another faith leader at a nearby event in Batavia. There was a group of faith leaders calling out Re Awaken America. I spoke with the Reverend Nathan Emsel. I played a clip of that to him, and I think we actually have his reaction to me playing him Burns' prayer.
So we love you, Letitia James. We pray and we cover you now.
That wasn't a prayer. That was a political speech tinged with violence. That Pastor Burns and the Re Awaken America tour would say you have to repent for opposing violence proves that this is not Christian. It's certainly not patriotic. It's unholy.
In the final analysis, Tom, was this a group that people should be worried about?
I suppose in context of specifically the calls for the 2020 election to be overturned, Emsel, again, voiced concerns that, maybe Re Awaken America doesn't lead to violence at the Re Awaken America event. Maybe violence doesn't even come in the days to follow because of the rhetoric. But what happens in 2024 if, whether it's Donald Trump or whoever the Republican nominee is, doesn't win the election? Does rhetoric like this saying essentially that it's God's will that Donald Trump be president, that Democrats are not in office, does that kind of rhetoric basically lead to another January 6th?
All right, and so much more of your reporting is online at WBFO.org. Tom Dinki, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Before we move on to further discussion, there is one other segment we need to take care of this morning, especially if we look at the calendar. Yesterday was 3 months since the shooting, and a group of survivors took that occasion to again talk about the distribution of funds and aid and support to both the TOPS employees and some of the people in the community that were not necessarily physically injured, but nonetheless people that still need help. One of them is Robbie Aguirre. She was in the store. She had an encounter with the shooter. She saw the gunplay between him and security guard Aaron Salter, and she told her story for the first time yesterday. We're going to close this segment with an extended piece of her discussion yesterday at the news conference. I do have to warn folks that if you are just still suffering some of the emotional trauma from the shooting, that this is the kind of audio that may trigger things for you. We are playing it about 4 minutes long, give you a chance to maybe walk away, get a cup of coffee, and come back for the rest of the program if indeed you're someone who can't necessarily hear this. But let's listen now to Robbie Aguirre.
Again, I hear the gunshots. And we're running. You see everybody running. We ran. I pointed to my daughter and I said, run towards the back because that's where I seen everyone. My daughter ran. Somebody tumbled over me and I fell. My 14-year-old realized that Mama let her hand go. And she came back for me. I said, run. She said, no. So all I could see was clothes that they had there. I don't know what they were doing. It was like some little top shirts or whatever. I snatched them. I threw them on top of my daughter. I brought my daughter so close to my chest like I was forcing her to be back into my belly. I sucked in my stomach so my daughter can breathe. I had clothes on top of me. The smartest thing I could think of was to look through those clothes and see what I can see. And that young man walked through that store like it was unreal, because the police officer, he was shooting that young man and those bullets was flying off of him like he was an Incredible Hulk. It was unbelievable. He fought and fought and fought. That young man sat there and smirked and smiled at him. And he continued to shoot. My leg fell out from me being balled up in the fetus position, and the police officer seen my foot. And he gave everything that he was given because he seen me and my daughter. My daughter's arm fell out, and he tried everything to stop that young man. Next thing I know, I seen the police officer get shot, and he fell to the ground in slow motion. It was like gravity was just holding him from not falling. It was pulling him down so slow. And the young man stood over him with a grin. And then he seen my leg out and he walked up to me and shoved the gun in my head and said I should die. And then he told me I should die, and I begged for my life because I had my daughter up under me. I'm begging a child He's younger than my boys. God must have heard my prayers. Because that young man decided, he said, oh, well, I guess I won't. And whoever he shot in those aisles, he shot him. And then he walked. And he walked. And that something told me, move. It was some objects right there with freezies on top of them. And I decided to squeeze myself through there just to make room for my daughter to be in. I laid on top of my daughter. My daughter was kicking me, saying, Mom, stop, what are you doing? A mother should never have to tell her child this. I'm going to take the heat from the gun. And once it go through me, it will barely touch you. Just know that I was here for you. And she's kicking me, telling me, Mom, no, I'll die with you. What parent has to tell that to her child? And I'm going to jokingly say it, I call it my Harry Potter scar. I have a scar in my head from the heat of the gun. And every day that I comb my hair, I see it. I feel it. I have pain in it. But guess what? I'm just a survivor. I don't matter. It's not even a money issue for me because I'm well taken care of. Best believe that. It's the principle. I take nothing away from the victims. I do not. And their families, my heart goes out to them. We go through this every day. I've seen a psychiatrist. My daughter sees a psychiatrist. I've been diagnosed with all types of crap. I didn't ask for this. I can't leave out my home. I can't get in the car without freaking out. I was a person that was always around. You could talk to me whenever I'm shut in. Every day I cry. Every day I'm emotional. I don't even know if I'm here or there. All I'm saying is acknowledge us. That's all we want.
On the 3-month anniversary of the top shootings yesterday, Robbie Aguirre had a news conference asking for more community-wide benefits and telling her story of what she witnessed on that day. This is Buffalo What's Next. We'll be right back.
Watch Remembering Crystal Beach Park.
Crystal Beach was such an important part of the lives of anyone growing up in the Western New York or Southern Ontario area.
Relive those childhood memories with the WNED PBS original production, Remembering Crystal Beach Park. Now streaming on YouTube and the PBS video app.
Get all the trusted local news you need right to your inbox each weekday morning with the WBFO Daily Email. Visit WBFO.org to sign up today.
Hey, we used to love this song. We still do, but we used to too. WBFO The Bridge, college radio for adults. Check us out on the TuneIn app or on your smart speakers and, of course, WBFO.org/The Bridge.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter @WBFO or email us at news@WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And welcome to Buffalo What's Next. With us this morning, we have Stan Martin from the Buffalo office director, as a matter of fact, of CAI Global. We'll get more into that topic or that title in just a second. And Ebony White from the Buffalo Center for Health Equity and also with the Health Disparities Task Force. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for joining us. Stan, CAI was a sponsor of the Igniting Hope Conference at the UB Med School. There was a lot of different elements involved in it, but the idea is what? To connect the community into better health and wellness.
Absolutely, absolutely. CAI, we're a proud sponsor of the Igniting Hope Conference. We actually partner with the Buffalo Center of Health Equity as well as the African American Health Equity Task Force, to really bring an initiative called REACH, Racial and Ethnic Approaches Towards Community Health, to the city of Buffalo, really addressing chronic disease and improving the health and wellness, of our community. So it was a great opportunity to really further build awareness and education here in terms of addressing some of the gaps that we saw in terms of healthcare and in terms of clinical linkages to get the word out.
And Ebony, of course, your group has been focusing on these health inequities that we see in the community. Can you just outline some of the things? These are conversations we've had previously, but I think they're conversations that need to keep happening. What are some of the top issues when we talk about health inequities in our community?
So for us, our focus has been around housing, food and nutrition options. Also, COVID, that has been on our main focus for many years now. And also the healthcare delivery system. So we look at a lot of those things, and overall the social determinants of health. Everything that impacts you from where you work, where you play, if you don't have the options to work, or where you get your education. So we're looking at everything holistically, everything that impacts someone of having what we would call a high quality, right? High quality life and access.
And there's some real stark numbers available when it comes to if you live in some zip codes in the city of Buffalo. Mm-hmm. Just can you go through just when it comes to mortality? The difference that we see?
The differences are those who live in particular zip codes. So if I was to say 14215, 14208, 14211, 14212, just to name a few, you're likely to develop some of these chronic diseases and other comorbidities and live less than your counterparts that live in different zip codes by like 10 plus years. That's stark, that you can see in data and look at the trends of that something is saying because I live in a particular place, I have lack of access to particular things that are important to a quality of life, that my life will end much sooner than someone that lives in a different zip code.
And Stan, you were originally from Buffalo. You've come back to open this office for CAI. I know you've been here for a couple of years now. Right. So talk about what you've learned since you've come back.
Yes, great question. One of the things that I learned since I came back, and I actually knew before I left,
hasn't changed that much.
Hasn't changed that much, but in all seriousness, like Buffalo is strong. Oftentimes, we don't hear about the great things that are happening, in our city. And in terms of healthcare and in terms of healthcare services, we oftentimes have focus on a narrative that blames and shames the community. And one of the things that we're very, very vested in is changing that narrative and amplifying the youth voices, and as we like to say, promoting what's strong and not what's wrong. So building on the assets, building on relationships, with the faith community, building relationships, with community residents who have that lived experience, who in some cases may have been left out of the conversation or didn't have a seat at the table or even a voice at the table. So what CAI and Reach does, Reach is a project of CAI, what we do is really amplify those voices so that the people are a part of the solution and not seen as a part of the problem.
That's interesting, that term that you use, blame and shame. People really feel that's a view inside these communities that they're being blamed for the problems that they have to endure.
Correct.
That's. Correct. I mean, can you expand on what they're seeing, what they're hearing about that?
The simplest way is someone said if they wanted more, they would do this or do that. So that's creating some level of shame for our community members. But if you don't have that as an option for you, so part of trauma, right? Trauma is eliminating choice. Many times our community lacks choice in options and say in these spaces. So that's where it becomes this blame and this shame, and that I have to live and be in the condition that I'm in always. And that's why it's so important and critical what CAI is doing, the Buffalo Center for Health Equity and others in this space, to give choice, to say that you are not the blame. This is infrastructure that was created systematically that impacts you, and you're not the cause, but you definitely will be a part of the solution to it, and that you play a major part in versus someone else doing it for you, but that we have what we need to do it for ourselves.
CAI Global, The name, I guess it says it all, because you're not just here in Buffalo.
Correct.
You're in other communities as well. From what you've seen in those other communities, does it give you hope and maybe even a sense of certainty that solutions can be found here?
Absolutely. Actually, one of the things that we are actually our framework is surrounding community-based participatory approaches, and as a result of the success and the input and the outpour of resident community involvement, that is being replicated in other cities. So I would like to say selfishly that it started here in Buffalo. Along with the chicken wings, that is now in all seriousness, is being replicated and is transportable in other marginalized communities that have similar, if not greater, needs as well.
And you're seeing it play out statistically? I mean, obviously mortality rates, that's something that takes a certain amount of time to really understand, but we're seeing it in other elements?
Yeah, well, we definitely utilize the science and the data, to help drive our decision-making and our programming. So we are seeing, advances. We are seeing, it make a significance. And actually, there was an article that was in the New York Times the other day that talked about how the increase in vaccination amongst African Americans and those who identify with the Black diaspora, was a direct result of some of the outreach that Ebony does and education from grassroots movements. So when you look at when COVID,
because initially that vaccination was very
over
low,
2 years ago,
Yeah.
And now you've seen a spike, you've seen an increase in those areas in terms of uptick, and a lot of it is attributed to a lot of the work that Ebony has done here in Buffalo and other initiatives across the city, similar under the REACH umbrella.
Concrete, that's got to be a real boost, I would think, to see that type of concrete result.
Yes. We are not where we were 2 years ago, right? Even with the influx of COVID infections, we definitely have a reduction of hospitalization and death. Where we were 2 years ago, you just did not know. People were dying, just families, and that's why it was critical for me and people who do grassroots boots on the ground all the time to speak their language, give them the information, never eliminate taking away choice from them, always having this open, normalizing conversation, making sure they're getting the facts, debunking a lot of the myths, and being available, and they know where to find you for future. One of the biggest things is I remember we were going out and doing tabling, and we were masked up, and we were trying to share, the message, hey, here's a pop-up clinic, and this is where you can go, and we're coordinating these things, and everyone is just running from you. And then you would see 4 or 5 months later, can you help me? I'm ready to go get my vaccine. I'm going. Really? My family is going. Because our pitch was do it for yourself, first of all. Do it for your family. And how, when you're doing it for your family, you're taking care of your community. And that was our constant. We never changed that because that's what it was about. And making sure people got the information that they needed when you gave them the info. So, you're passing out palm cards and QR codes, and they're reading it. Don't take my word. Here you go.
Right.
Here it is. Evaluate it. And then you allow them, then we did the 3 A's, which reviewed, to ask, advise, and then assist them. So when they were ready, that was the simplest way during those Thanksgiving conversations when people had to make hard choices about, can my family come over?
Right.
I can only have this many. Have you had your COVID test? Have you had your vaccine? Those were hard times. That was difficult to do for anybody. That was difficult to say, I'm accustomed to 30 people Christmas. It's just 4 of us. Right. We're on Zoom.
Zoom Christmas.
We're on Zoom Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's because we can't be together.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Ebony, during that time, it was during the epic, during the height of the pandemic, being able to work with the Buffalo Center of Health Equity, to be able to work with the University of Buffalo and many faith leaders to identify who are those that were directly and mostly impacted by it, and then to create a plan, to make sure that, people had access, to not just vaccination, but also transportation, for food, for health care, even just to work. Because, many of those who were on the front line were, those are people of color.
Right.
So, how do we, really address the basic needs of everyone in the community in a comprehensive manner? And I think that's one of the beauty of having these partnerships, being able to be a trusted messenger that the community identifies, is so important.
It's interesting. Midway through our conversation, we were talking about the problems, and the reality is it's not a great picture, but just this portion of the conversation right here gives me the thought that if these efforts that we're seeing, and like you said, the spotlight that's been, placed upon certain realities in the last couple of months, that if things can stay consistent, if that outreach can be there and that trust can be built, there's some hope here.
Definitely, and that's why the conference is so important and has been important, because that is just not a space for academia to get together and talk about ideas and plans, but it's also a space for the community to be in that same space with academia and say, hey, you got that wrong. Let's try this. And that's where it's just a huge community, and you just see everyone and all of the gifts and the talents and the strength that they have come into one space and come up with some phenomenal plans of how to move forward with hope. Hope is what keeps us all going. Hope for better, hope for everything. So it has definitely always been a great opportunity.
And then maybe just a final word here is before we close our segment of just about that moving forward. Stan Martin?
Sure, absolutely. We're looking to continue to amplify the community's voice. We can continuously, are trying to do our continuous quality improvement, as we say, to say, how are we doing? Did we get this right? As Ebony mentioned earlier, what can we do differently? What do we need to do more of? And what's not working, let's not do that.
Right.
Yeah. But it's coming from the community's perspective, and then providing access and amplifying their voices so that, once again, they're a part of the solution, not seen as a part of the problem. And for those who want to find out more information about REACH, they can go follow us on Facebook at REACH Buffalo, and there's more information there, or they can visit our website at www.caiglobal.org.
And Ebony, final word?
Final thought. Community, we have the answers, right? We have the answers. Get involved. Your block clubs, your task force advocates, champions, be a part of Chickatelli and Associates. You can go right to their page that's staying shared to get valuable information and insight. BuffaloHealthEquity.org. Join us there. We look forward to continuing having town halls. Come and be a part of it. Anyway, your voice matters. And when you see us out and we have surveys and we're asking questions, we're not just prying. This is what we take into those boardrooms. This gives us proof of what we need to do, what we need to change, and how we're moving in the right direction, or what we need to totally eliminate and do differently. Help us continue to elevate your voices and put you as the spotlight for all of the good that you do. City of good neighbors.
Well, let's see if the city can live up to that reputation, shall we? Ebony White is with the Buffalo Center for Health Equity and also the Health Disparities Task Force. Stan Martin, the director of the Buffalo office of CAI Global, one of the sponsors of the Igniting Hope Conference. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back on Buffalo, what's next? Alex Wright, head of the African Heritage Food Co-op here in Buffalo. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm always excited to be here.
We've talked a lot about the co-op before. We can get into some of the updates on, because I know you guys have been part of the news cycle lately, but we want to know more about how you guys are involved with REACH. We talked about that with Stan Martin, but why don't you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I came on with REACH maybe a year ago. At this point, doing my food work with the co-op, we met with the REACH folks, and we've been helping them sort of train food pantries to, on distribution methods, signage on what's healthy, what's not healthy. They have this great red light, yellow light, green light signage, which lets people know as they're grabbing food what they should be getting more of and what they should be getting less of. We've been preaching Your Choice food pantries as a way for dignity. And what Your Choice food pantries are, it gives people an opportunity to go into the pantry and pick the thing that they're actually going to eat.
Right.
What happens sometimes is folks, myopically think, oh, well, they're hungry, so we're going to give them anything.
Right. This canned good of that or whatever.
And that's too short-sighted, because what happens with that is you have a lot of excess, or like these beets are sitting over here,
It's interesting you mentioned beets, but continue.
Yeah. So you need to have one, better education on how you can cook these things, what you can do with these things. That's one. But then two, why not focus your ordering around what people are getting, right? So, a lot of these pantries, they purchase from the food bank or from other places. And we just have to be, and we train them and talk to them about being more conscientious about what they're ordering, and even creating things like share tables, right? So maybe they received a bag and they have these, spaghetti squash is in there, and they don't necessarily know what to do with the spaghetti squash, right?
Right.
But their neighbor might love spaghetti squash, right? So they can put that on the trade table, and then they can grab that and move forward.
Are you seeing solid results from this effort?
Well, we are seeing...
it's new.
It's very new. So I don't think it's been long enough for us to see as many results as we would like, but we are seeing some results. But we're also getting pushback on the Your Choice, because it's so much easier and convenient to pre-make bags, right? And then, hey, come and get your bag. But again, then you come outside and you look on the side of your church or the side of something, and you see all the things that people didn't want right there, or maybe a block away. So it ends up being food waste, right?
Which we can't afford to have.
And we have to understand that even people are in poverty, they're still people. They're not like dogs where you can just give them whatever you want to give them and they're going to just lap it up. Like people, they still have taste, they still have tongues, they still have taste buds, right? So, it doesn't mean, hey, we should be providing filet mignon, but it does mean that, let's give people things that they're actually going to eat.
Right. What about, a lot of what you do with the co-op, fresh food. And I know for myself, 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have touched most of the things that you bring from your food co-op in terms of fresh produce. That's changed for a variety of reasons. But in that case, again, how do you work that through? Because if I'm a typical individual, there are other people who say, oh, whatever, wax beans.
Right.
No thanks, right? How do you work through that?
Well, one of the things we've been doing with Reach too are these cooking classes that we've done. We've done at the Delavan Grider Community Center, and then we've publicized them through social media. And one we did was a summer salad, and we did that based on things that you may have left over, like a cucumber, tomato, some lettuce, and like how do you put that and how do you make something filling, right? We made a kind of reversed stuffed pepper using ground beef, using peppers, using this kind of stuff. Quick, easy, nutritious, and healthy. We even did a banana split using Nutella instead of chocolate syrup, using low-fat yogurt, and then you put the bananas, you could throw a little strawberry, blueberry, so now you have fresh fruits, you have low sugar intake stuff, right? And you have chocolate, right, but healthier. So you can do a lot of things that you like to do with a little thought, a little planning, and not, break your caloric budget, as it were.
Right. I actually just made that sound really, really good. I've sworn off ice cream, but boy, it sounds good. All right. So that's with Reach, but I just want to get a little bit of an update on the African Heritage Food Co-op. I know the governor was here. There was a lot of news about funding and things along those lines, and I didn't get all the particulars. But tell us what's happening.
So we had two really big pieces of news. One with the USDA HFFI grant, which is health, food, and two other things. And they've granted us $200,000 that we can use for both our Niagara facility and for Carlton. And right on the heels of that, the governor announced that they are going to support the Carlton project full boat for $3 million.
Wow. So,
of course, that's coming, but the wheels of government money.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny, when you owe taxes, that's because
the wheels are pretty fast.
Right. But, but we're very, very thankful, and that's just a joke. We're very thankful Governor Hochul and her team for doing some hard work and really coming down and getting to know the people and supporting a frontline-led company. So on top of that, we're doing monthly accountability and transparency meetings, which anyone from the community could come in and see who we're going to choose as developer, who the contractors are going to be, how we came to those conclusions, who our architects are. Like, this is fully open for anyone who is interested to want to see what's happening, how the money is going to be spent, because what we're trying to do is real holistic development. We're looking for contractors who look like the neighborhoods we're in. From day one, we want to be putting money in the pockets of the people in, of, and from the community. Our next transparency meeting is going to be August 27th. At the Johnny B. Wiley Center. You enter on the Dodge Street side. There is an indoor part of Johnny B. Wiley. Some folks don't know that. Around the corner of Jefferson and Dodge. Come in. It's going to be at 11 a.m.
All right.
So again, that's August 27th, 11 a.m. at Johnny B. Wiley. And you can come in and ask any question you want to ask. Now, we're only going to be there to 1. So you can ask any question you want to ask up until 1 o'clock.
Gotcha.
But we do a presentation. We have a nice 360 visual of the building. Talk to you about we're going to be putting a cafe upstairs as well as a gathering space and a training space. We're bringing back the old school runners. So we're going to be hiring young people, because the whole thing is we want to make it walkable. So if you're an elder and you're coming down to the grocery store, right, you still have to get your bags back to your house.
Right.
So we're going to be hiring young folks who will bag up your stuff. Now, ATVs and UTVs are illegal in Buffalo, but we're going to get some golf carts, put some big wheels on them, kind of trick them out a little bit.
Right.
And the young people will bag up your stuff if you live within a 10-block radius. You jump on that golf cart and you guys go on back, and they'll even help you get it into your home. So that employs young people. It shows them about hard work, shows them about entrepreneurship, and it provides a service to our elders, right? And it just brings back that community feel holistically. So those are some of the new updates.
That's amazing. Amazing. Anybody wants more information? I mean, they can go to Johnny B. Wiley on the 27th, but is there a way they can find out more about the African Heritage Food Co-op?
They can. They can go to myahfc.com, which is our website. That's MYA as in Apple, H as in Harry, F as in Frank, C as in childcare. .com. And you also can find us on Facebook, African Heritage Food Co-op.
All right. Alex Wright, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
Alex Wright with the African Heritage Food Co-op here in Buffalo. Earlier in the segment, we talked with Stan Martin. He is the director of the Buffalo office for CAI Global, and Ebony White for the Buffalo Center for Health Equity. This is Buffalo What's Next.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Hello, I'm host Brigid Jaipaul-Valenza. Today we are here with Ekuaa Mends-Aidoo from Evergreen Health, where she is Chief People and Diversity Officer. Hello, Ekuaa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a time.
Yeah.
How are you?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think we're in a position in place where we're trying to think about a lot of different things right now. I think I'm personally in a place where I'm looking to help and give back because there's been a lot that's been going on. But taking it a day at a time, really. I can say that's really how I am.
So right now we are 3 months out from the 514 massacre.
Mm-hmm.
You do a lot of work in inclusion, diversity, equity.
Yeah.
Before May 14th and to now,
mm-hmm.
what changes have you noticed?
Yeah, I can say, 2020 was really a time that we had a lot of conversations around the DEI space. We had George Floyd's murder that really sparked a lot of conversations and organizations looking to move beyond some of the traditional learning and education that they were doing to now looking at ways to operationalize DEI within their organizations. I think for us here in Buffalo, it's been a litmus test since 514. There's a lot of things that we have learned and are continuing to learn, but it really just gave us an opportunity to kind of level set and see where we needed to be going as a community and as a business community altogether as well.
So what does DEI mean to you exactly?
Well, I would say as a practitioner in this space, it's really getting to the point where you're creating environments that are very inclusive, right? And by inclusive, I mean, no matter how you're coming into an organization, you're going to feel a sense of belonging. You're going to feel a sense that you can come as your full self and just really thrive in that organizational culture. So for me as a practitioner, it's creating spaces that no matter how you're showing up, you're going to succeed and thrive. When we talk about diversity, I always say it's a fact, right? You can name different aspects of diversity, but inclusion's a choice. And organizations can decide whether they're going to have inclusive cultures or exclusive cultures, but people are paying attention. These are conversations that even during interview processes, they're asking us these questions as people that are job seekers, right?
Right.
And so just creating environments that no matter what, you're going to succeed.
So there are people out there who work in places and spaces that don't have DEI officers. They don't have dedicated personnel to DEI. What can they do to foster diversity, equity, inclusion in their organization?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of organizations that don't necessarily have dedicated resources to DEI, but everybody can start somewhere, right? And I think a really great place to start is auditing what your current practices are, right? Looking at it through a lens of equity to make sure that whatever policies and procedures you have in place are not negatively impacting people in an unintended way, right? Like there's a lot of things that folks think, oh, this is great that we have these different resources. There was an organization I was working with recently who would give everyone like a gym membership pass as a part of their health components, which seems like an awesome perk, right? Like working at this business. But then when you looked at where those gyms were located, they weren't in places that everyone could access easily, right? They were located in specific communities that not everyone,
had access
to, right? So I think even from that lens, surveying your folks and seeing what type of organizational climate you have is really important. Looking at your engagement scores You know, a lot of folks do their engagement surveys with their employees, but what does that look like? If you disaggregated the demographics, how do women feel? You know, how do people of color feel? How do people who maybe have different abilities feel in your organization? And that will give you a starting point for maybe where to look at.
So you are, you know, just one person.
Yeah.
I'm one person in an organization. I may not be a black person or a brown person, and I'm sitting at the boardroom table. I look around and I don't see any black or brown people there. How do I, as that employee, say to my upper management, say to the hiring people or the CEO or whoever it might be who's in charge, to say, listen, why aren't there?
Yeah.
I mean, first off, it would certainly take a lot of courage to do that.
Sure.
But people worry about their jobs.
Sure.
You know, being labeled a certain way or not being labeled a certain way.
Right.
You know, and the politics of that. So how do you navigate that? How would you navigate that?
Yeah, I think, you know, it does take a lot of courage, right, to ask questions that normally aren't asked. But, you know, as we're shifting into this day and age, these are questions that we can't afford to not ask, right?
Right.
And so I think exploration is a big part of that, going to your leadership and asking, hey, what is our plan around diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is this something that our organization takes seriously? And getting those answers directly from those folks. Maybe there are things that organization's already working on, or maybe they don't know where to start. But I would say just those exploration questions in general will get people starting to talk about it and think about it. A lot of folks have also started things like employee resource groups that, you know, there are organizations that have these resource groups that talk about different identities and things that, you know, folks are having conversations about, whether that be, you know, from a gender perspective, from ethnicity and race perspective, but creating kind of these subgroups that can start to have some of those conversations and start to push the needle forward as well. So maybe that's a way that that organization can start and that employee can start to shift those conversations internally.
This is Buffalo What's Next? We're here with Chief People and Diversity Officer for Evergreen Health, Ekuaa Mends-Aidoo. There are often conversations about representation and what representation means to people of color, to non-white people, simply and solely. How important is that? How important is representation?
I think representation is very important, right? We talk about some of these organizations that are doing this type of work, or doing any type of work, right, from an industry perspective. But if you're in spaces, right, so I'm coming from a healthcare background, and so we serve people in a healthcare need, right? And so if you're looking at that person and you don't have any frame of reference for what life they might live outside of your walls, you know, like the doctor's office or primary care, you're missing a really big component of how that person is coming in and how you might serve that person. And so a lot of organizations, I know, you know, we've talked about nonprofits that are doing work that are, you know, helping areas on Jefferson Avenue. If you don't have that frame of reference for how that person, their lived experience, you're doing a great disservice to those folks, right? And so I think from a representation standpoint in the DEI world, we talk often about best practices and mirroring the representation of your employees to where you, you know, you serve in that community. And that's a best practice. And it's because you're getting those different perspectives of folks that are coming from that lived experience. And so without it, how are you informing the work that you're doing? You know, is that coming from your own internal interests, or is it coming from the community that exists and existed there probably before you got there in that community, right?
Right.
So it's really important to take that frame of reference from a direct lived experience for sure.
So, you know, one of the questions that I had really was, some people can say that imagination versus representation is what's needed in order to see yourself or to have empathy for another person, that takes more imagination than it does representation. How would you respond to that?
Empathy is something that I feel like innately we should have, right? We should innately be concerned about other people, even if they don't look like you. So I would say that empathy is definitely something in this country we've been talking a lot about, right? How do you encourage people to have more empathy for people that might not look like them? But in terms of the representation component, it is oftentimes where people do have to imagine what that might look like because someone hasn't done it before. And so there's a lot of firsts that we're still celebrating. And sometimes people ask, well, why is this such a big deal that we're celebrating, this first?
The first African-American woman on the Supreme Court.
Exactly. But representation in that sense really matters because, a young Black woman looking at, Justice Ketanji, that's amazing, right? To see that someone has done it before and that you have a path of doing the same thing. And so it's representation, it's some imagination and just seeing that, hey, I can do this. Someone else has done it before. And even if someone hasn't done it before, saying I have the will to be the first is really important for folks.
And part of that too is exposure and education and really having that a drive, that innate drive.
Right.
But that really does come out of your education.
Yeah.
It does come out of the spaces where you're from.
Right.
And it really truly is difficult to have imagination if you're concerned that you don't have lunch today.
Yeah, absolutely, right? We always talk about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And from a healthcare perspective, too, we think about it from the social determinants of health perspective, right? So we know that accessing healthcare or accessing a doctor is only about 20% of someone's total care. Things like transportation, education, economics, safety and security within your own communities, those are all important facets. Access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And so it's only one component of a larger social and economic need that we need to be talking about for sure.
Yeah. Let's go back to what corporations can do. Talk to me about corporate culture.
Yeah.
And the importance of that, especially right now for people.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, right now, the millennial generation is one of the largest in the workplace right now. There's about 4 to 5 different generations at any given point in time. But a lot of the conversations that we're having as it relates to culture is the need for that to be the focus. Oftentimes people are like, oh, millennials and Generation Z, which is now entering the workplace as well, want the flexibility. They want the ability to work from anywhere, especially after the pandemic.
Certainly.
But what we've seen after looking at different surveying is the fact that culture is still number one for a lot of people. They want to belong to an organization that cares about them, the behaviors reflect the mission and values that organization stands on, and they want to make sure that they can thrive within that organization and bring more of their full selves to work. So culture is still number one in terms of what folks are looking at as it relates to making the decision of where they want to, work.
And certainly I think that, people have choice. I mean, the Great Resignation has people changing jobs for maybe not necessarily for more money.
Right.
But for a better work culture, a better environment where they can thrive. We were talking earlier a little bit about racism and the difference between a company having anti-racists or just someone who's not a racist.
Yeah.
And there's a difference.
There is a difference. And I think, in talking about it, one is more passive, but one is just more proactive, right? And so to be anti-racist, you have to be proactively combating some of those norms and status quo that existed prior to you having a focus on this, right?
Right.
And so to be proactive, that means that you're often anticipating some of the needs of the people that you're serving, of your own employees as well. What are the differences in terms of how people are showing up, right? I think even from a gender perspective, these are conversations that we're having is, the curb cut effect is something that we often talk about as DEI practitioners. And it came out of the, the ADA compliance realm where people talked about the curb cuts within sidewalks. And although people that were differently abled, it helped and benefited them, it benefited a lot of other folks as well. If you're pushing a stroller, that curb cut is helpful for you,
very
right?
helpful, yes.
I love to travel. Pulling my suitcase, I can use that. People that are maybe, taking things off a truck and rolling it into a store or whatever you have, it's useful for them too. So when you always solve for the people who, have the most issues, it's going to help everybody. And I think from a racial perspective, we've seen that as well. Folks who are disenfranchised the most, if you're solving for their needs, everyone else is going to benefit as well. So I think that's the larger connection point.
We all definitely have biases. And that informs how we move through the world,
Right.
how we move through spaces. Talk to me about unconscious bias.
Yeah. So, if you have a brain, you have bias, right? We're all born into it. And it's honestly how the brain works. There's different, like the frontal and temporal lobes in your brain produce stereotypes. And so we actively have to, concern ourselves with how do we kind of work around those biases and how do we better inform ourselves to react and to act differently. And so I think first and foremost, just understanding that you have bias is the first step. Secondly, it's doing a little bit more exploration and digging into what those biases might be. Harvard has a great way of actually testing that with the Harvard Implicit Association test, where you can test things like gender bias or racial bias, et cetera. But the awareness is first and foremost, and then actively working against what those biases look like. A lot of conversations that I have with people, too, are questioning and auditing the very things that you take in. So your media, what media are you consuming, and does it showcase different people in a different way, right? That would maybe reinforce those biases that you might already have pre-existing. What books are you reading? What are you consuming? And are there differences in what that might look like? And then actively going and looking for things that might not be in agreement with what you already might believe is a way to also, attack some of those biases as well.
It's fantastic. I think it's important really for people to understand, and there's a lot of self-reflection that really has to go into this. Ekuaa, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fascinating conversation, and we hope to have you back on again to further the conversation. We want to hear from you. You can use the Talk to Us feature on the WBFO app and leave us a message, or send comments and questions via Twitter or email. Thank you for listening to Buffalo What's Next, a program that unapologetically confronts the reasons why the May 14th mass shooting occurred. We'll be back tomorrow. That's our promise to you here at WBFO, WBFO HD1, Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR station.